They put me in a home and divided my belongings. But what they didn't know is I had 3 more properties and a new will. This is my story, about how my own flesh and blood tried to erase me from my life while I was still breathing, and how I reminded them who raised them. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and drop in the comments where you're watching from. 'Cause this journey, it's about to get real. I heard them before I saw them. My own children in my backyard, dividing up my life like vultures circling a body that wasn't even cold. The house alone is worth over $800,000 in this market, Richard was saying. My middle child, who always counted dollars before blessings. And her investments? We need to focus on getting her into Golden Sunset first, Vivian cut in. My firstborn, always the commander. Then we handle the assets. Marcus is too sentimental to understand what needs to be done. I froze by the kitchen window, the pitcher of sweet tea trembling in my hands. After burying my husband James 40 years ago, I'd raised these children alone, working as a law professor at Howard, marching for our rights when the world said we didn't deserve them. Now they were planning my disposal over the lunch I'd spent all morning cooking. Mama needs help, Vivian continued. She's not safe alone anymore. My blood burned hot. One small fall last month, tripping over that damn rug James always said would kill somebody, and suddenly I'm incompetent? I set down the pitcher, straightened my back, and walked outside with my smile fixed tight as church gloves. Hope y'all saved room for peach cobbler, I announced. Their heads snapped toward me, guilt flashing across their faces before they recovered. Mama, we were just discussing, Richard started. The weather? Mighty fine for May. I poured the tea with a steady hand, meeting their eyes one by one. Only Marcus, my youngest, couldn't hold my gaze. Later, when they'd gone, I sat alone in my living room. The house James and I bought in 1965, when most black families couldn't even get a showing in this neighborhood. The home where I'd nursed James through cancer, raised 3 children, and built a life that meant something. That night, I called Marcus, my computer science professor's son who thought his mama didn't understand technology. I need you to do something for me, I said, and you can't tell your brother and sister. 3 days later, tiny cameras watched from my bookshelf, clock, and kitchen cabinet. Not because I was paranoid, because I was right. They came like clockwork. Vivian organizing my papers when I napped, Richard bringing his friend Harvey, an estate attorney who watched me like I was already dead. We just want to update your will, Mama, Richard said. Make things easier. Easier for who? I asked, but signed nothing. When I caught Vivian with her hands in my jewelry box, heirlooms from my grandmother who'd been born enslaved, I knew it was time. Just admiring, she claimed, closing the lid. You should really keep inventory of these valuable pieces, Mama. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart racing with a feeling I hadn't felt since those days marching in Selma. Fear mixed with determination. They thought I was just a feeble old woman, but they forgot who I was before I was their mother. Eleanor Washington didn't raise fighters just to lie down when the battle came to her door. Mom, we're worried about your memory, Vivian said, her voice dripping with artificial concern as she rearranged my pills. Pills I'd been managing just fine for 20 years. My memory's sharp as that tongue of yours, I replied, watching her through new eyes. Every helpful visit now revealed its true purpose. They were building a case against me, piece by piece. Richard started dropping by unannounced, always when I was tired. Found any more of those stock certificates, Mama? I could organize your finances. The same finances I'd managed well enough to put all 3 of them through college. Only Marcus seemed genuinely concerned, but I noticed how they excluded him. After dinner one night, I overheard Vivian in the hallway. If you help us convince her there's enough equity in the house to clear your kids' college funds, she told him. Don't you want Aisha and Devin to have what we had? My own daughter, using my great-grandchildren as bargaining chips. When they left, Marcus lingered. Mama, what's going on with the cameras? I pulled him close, whispered, they're moving faster than I thought. The recordings upload automatically? He nodded. To a secure server. Even if they find the cameras, they can't access what's already recorded. Smart boy, just like his father. The next morning, I made 2 calls. First to my old friend Doris Williams, retired head nurse from Johns Hopkins. Eleanor Washington, it's been too long. Her voice warm like summer. Doris, I need your medical expertise, off the record. My second call went to Walter Johnson, my cousin and accountant in Atlanta. The man who'd helped me set up Eleanor Johnson Properties, LLC 30 years ago, in my maiden name, separate from anything the children knew about. Walter, we need to activate the contingency plan James set up, I said, the one we hoped we'd never need. On my nightstand sat a photo of James and me from 1972, arms linked at a protest. He'd always said, "Eleanor, in this world, a black family's wealth is always one signature away from disappearing. We protect ours." Those words guided me as I pulled out the false bottom of my jewelry box, revealing the key to a safe deposit box at a bank across town. Inside that box, deeds to 3 properties, a second will, and documentation of the LLC are protection against exactly this situation. That afternoon, Vivian arrived with a stranger. "Mama, this is Dr. Stevens. He specializes in geriatric care." The way she emphasized geriatric made my skin crawl. "I didn't request a new doctor," I said. "We're just concerned about your fall," Vivian replied, her hand on my shoulder too tight to be comforting. I watched them exchange glances when they thought I wasn't looking. The doctor's examination was cursory, his questions leading. "Do you often feel confused, Mrs. Washington?" "Only by unnecessary questions, doctor." As they spoke in hushed tones by the door, I glimpsed my medical file. Early signs of dementia, written in fresh ink. The diagnosis was already written before he even arrived. "Mrs. Washington, can you tell me who the president is?" Dr. Stevens asked, watching me like I might sprout a second head. "I can name every president since Roosevelt." "Doctor, would you like them alphabetically or chronologically?" The bite in my voice made Vivian shift uncomfortably behind him. He scribbled something in his notepad. "Your daughter mentions episodes of confusion, getting lost in familiar places. The only thing confusing me is why my daughter is inventing symptoms." I turned to Vivian, whose face tightened like I'd slapped her. When the doctor stepped out, I moved quickly to his open laptop. The screen confirmed my fears. Patient shows signs of cognitive decline, possible early-stage dementia, all based on Vivian's lies. After they left, I sat in James's old armchair, my hands shaking not from age but rage. The phone rang. Marcus checking in. "They brought a doctor to diagnose me with dementia," I told him, keeping my voice low in case there were ears I hadn't identified. "They're moving faster now." "Mama, this is wrong," his voice cracked. "I can't believe Vivian and Richard would believe it. Check the footage from today." "And Marcus? They're trying to buy your silence with promises about the house money." His silence told me they'd already approached him. That evening, I called Doris. Her 50 years of nursing experience made her laugh bitterly at the so-called diagnosis. "Eleanor, a proper cognitive assessment requires multiple specialists and standardized testing protocols. Not some family doctor friend making house calls. This is elder abuse, plain and simple. I need to document everything," I said. "They're building their case. I need to build mine." "I'll help you find a legitimate geriatric specialist for an independent assessment," she promised, "one with no connection to your children." I spent that night making preparations. I moved my important documents to a waterproof pouch hidden in the lining of my winter coat. I wrote detailed accounts of each suspicious interaction, dated and with as many direct quotes as I could remember. When I heard footsteps at 2 a.m., I wasn't even surprised. Through barely opened eyes, I watched Richard in my study, photographing financial documents with his phone. The camera in the bookshelf would be capturing everything. The next morning, I received a call from a Dr. Freeman's office, confirming an appointment I never made. When I questioned it, the receptionist said, "Your daughter Vivian set this up. Dr. Freeman specializes in geriatric cognitive assessment," another puppet in their theater. That afternoon, I changed all my banking passwords and called my bank manager, an old student of mine, to place alerts on my accounts. Then, I did something that would have made James proud. I contacted Nicholas Chen, a young attorney specializing in elder law who'd once interviewed me for his thesis on civil rights pioneers. "Professor Washington," he said when he returned my call, "this is an honor. Mr. Chen, I need legal counsel. Discreetly. I believe my children are attempting to force me into guardianship to gain control of my assets." His sharp intake of breath told me everything. "Unfortunately, Professor, I see this more often than you'd think." Sunday arrived with the chiming of my doorbell. I opened it to find not just my children, but strangers wearing practiced expressions of concern. "Pastor Willis from my church." A woman introduced as Barbara Miller, social worker. A distinguished silver-haired man presented as Dr. Freeman. An ambush disguised as care. "Mother, please sit down," Vivian directed, already taking control of my home. "We're here because we love you." I sat in my chair, the one James reupholstered for our 25th anniversary, and watched my life being dismantled by committee. "Eleanor," Pastor Willis began. "Pastor," using my first name like we were suddenly equals, "your children have shared concerns about your well-being." Vivian presented a folder of incidents. My fall, last month. The time I allegedly left the stove on, I hadn't. A neighbor claiming I was confused in the grocery store, Mrs. Patterson, who mysteriously began speaking to Vivian after 20 years of silence. "And several concerning medical assessments," Richard added, passing around papers I wasn't offered to review. "We've found a wonderful assisted living community," Vivian continued, sliding a glossy brochure for Golden Sunset Homes across my coffee table. "Private room, daily activities, 24-hour care." "No," I said, the word dropping like a stone. "This is exactly the denial Dr. Stevens mentioned." Richard sighed, glancing at the others. "She doesn't understand her condition." "I understand perfectly," I replied, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "This isn't an intervention. It's a coup." Dr. Freeman cleared his throat. "Mrs. Washington, resistance to care is common with cognitive decline. Your children have your best interests." "My children have my house and accounts in their sights," I cut him off. "And you, sir, haven't performed a single legitimate cognitive test on me." The room tensed. Marcus stared at the floor, shoulders hunched with the weight of his silence. "We've already filed for emergency temporary guardianship," Vivian announced, her lawyer voice replacing her daughter one. "The hearing is Tuesday." My stomach dropped. So soon. "My client doesn't need to be ambushed in her own home," came a voice from the doorway. Nicholas Chen stood there, briefcase in hand. Marcus must have let him in. "Who are you?" Richard demanded. "Nicholas Chen, Mrs. Washington's attorney." He moved to my side. "This meeting is over. Any further communications go through me." They left in chaos, angry whispers floating back as they retreated. Only Marcus lingered. "Mama, I didn't know they were this far along," he whispered. "They told me this was just a family discussion." "They're counting on my isolation," I replied. "That's always the first step in controlling someone." Later, I found something slipped under my door. A court notice. Judge Robert Thompson, Vivian's golfing buddy's husband, had granted a temporary emergency guardianship hearing. In 3 days, I could lose everything. That night, sleep impossible, I sat in my garden under stars that had witnessed worse injustices than mine. I remembered James's words when we fought for voting rights. "They only come for you this hard when they know you've got power they fear." My children had forgotten that Eleanor Washington was never just a mother. I was a fighter long before I was their mama. The courtroom felt colder than February midnight. I sat straight-backed beside Nicholas, watching Vivian and Richard whisper with their attorney, a shark in an expensive suit. Judge Thompson, Vivian's connection, presided with barely concealed familiarity. "This emergency hearing concerns the guardianship of Eleanor Marie Washington," he announced, already using the tone reserved for discussing children and incompetence. Their case unfolded with ruthless efficiency. Dr. Stevens testified about my advancing dementia. Dr. Freeman confirmed it without having properly examined me. Barbara Miller recommended immediate placement in assisted living for my safety. Nicholas objected repeatedly, citing improper assessment protocols and conflicts of interest. Judge Thompson overruled him each time. Then Richard testified, voice breaking on cue. "Last week, I found Mom wandering in her nightgown at 3 p.m., confused about the time." A blatant lie. I was gardening that day, fully dressed. When my turn came, the judge interrupted each of my responses, cutting me off mid-sentence like my words were meaningless noise. "Your Honor," Nicholas argued, "my client deserves a full neuropsychological evaluation by independent specialists, not this rushed process." "Mr. Chen," Judge Thompson replied, "this court has sufficient medical testimony. Mrs. Washington clearly needs protection from herself." 2 hours later, it was done. Temporary guardianship granted to Vivian and Richard. 60 days to determine permanent status. "You'll be transported to Golden Sunset tomorrow morning," Vivian informed me outside the courtroom, her hand on my arm both support and restraint. We've already packed essentials. The next morning, they arrived at 7 a.m. Two uniformed attendants from Golden Sunset, Vivian supervising like a prison transfer. You can bring personal items that make your room home-like, one attendant said kindly. Photos, a favorite blanket. I chose my things carefully. The quilt James's mother made us, the photo album hidden in its lining, the winter coat with documents sewn inside, my cell phone and charger that Marcus had programmed with automatic cloud backup. Golden Sunset smelled of industrial cleaner and defeat. My room was bare-walled, institutional, a narrow bed, plastic chair, shared bathroom. You'll adjust, Vivian assured me, already backing toward the door. We'll visit weekly. Alone, I sat on the strange bed, listening to shuffling feet and distant moans. The doors required key cards to exit. Meals were scheduled, medications administered whether needed or not. I observed everything. The shift change at 2:30 p.m. when supervision thinned. The kindly aide named Tanya, who looked at my file with suspicion. The old lawyer 3 doors down, who muttered about improper conservatorships during checkers. On day 3, Marcus visited, watched closely by staff. They're selling everything, Mama, he whispered while hugging me. The piano, Daddy's books, your art. He slipped something into my pocket. A prepaid phone, already programmed with key contacts. A note with one sentence. Cameras still recording. Judge Martinez returns from vacation next week. That night, hiding in the bathroom during room checks, I called Doris. They've emptied half the house already, she reported, after visiting as an old friend helping organize. Richard brought an appraiser. Vivian's measuring for renovations. I clutched the phone so hard my knuckles ached. Take photos of everything, I instructed. And Doris, check my email. Password is JamesSelma65. Look for messages between my children. 2 days later, during shift change, Doris called back. Eleanor, they found the apartment in Baltimore you rent out, she said. But Richard's email mentioned properties, plural. He thinks there's more. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. Let them think that. Because what they didn't know, what James had helped me arrange decades ago, was that Eleanor Johnson Properties, LLC owned 3 additional buildings in Washington, D.C., managed through my cousin Walter. Properties that generated steady income deposited to accounts they knew nothing about. My children thought they were dismantling my life. They didn't realize I'd built more than one. Golden Sunset wasn't just a prison. It was an eraser, each day designed to fade you into institutional sameness until you forgot who you were before these walls. Time for your medication, Mrs. Washington, the morning aide announced, rattling a cup of pills I'd never taken before arriving. What are these? I asked, the same question every day. Doctor's orders, for your condition. My condition, the fiction written by men who'd spent less than 30 minutes evaluating me. I'd been carefully palming the sedatives, hiding them in a small tear in my mattress. I needed clarity, not chemical compliance. By week 2, I'd built my alliance. Tanya, the night nurse who'd seen too many temporary residents become permanent. Mrs. Washington, I've reviewed your chart, she whispered during evening rounds. These meds and your supposed symptoms don't align. Something's not right. Mr. Johnson, the former elder law attorney 3 doors down, trapped by a nephew's guardianship. They used the same playbook on me, he explained during our chess games. Follow the money and you'll find the motive. And most importantly, Marcus and Doris on the outside. Using the prepaid phone during shift changes, we coordinated. Marcus downloaded footage from the home cameras showing Richard and Vivian discussing how to split the proceeds from selling my home. Doris photographed them removing artwork, antiques, even family photo albums. Mom's lawyer called again, Marcus reported. They're pushing for a permanent guardianship hearing before Judge Thompson leaves for his summer home. We need someone with actual credentials, I said. Contact Dr. Patricia Reynolds at Johns Hopkins. We marched together in '68. Tell her Eleanor Washington needs a favor. Dr. Reynolds, renowned geriatrician, author of standardized cognitive assessment protocols, agreed immediately. She says she can conduct a proper evaluation next Tuesday, Marcus reported. But how will you get out? Leave that to me and Tanya. The plan was simple, but risky. Tanya would sign me out for a dental emergency. Mr. Johnson provided legal language for a motion challenging the guardianship on procedural grounds, filed by Nicholas with a different judge. The evaluation with Dr. Reynolds took 3 hours, comprehensive, rigorous, properly documented. "Eleanor," she said when finished, "you're sharper than half my colleagues. This is the most egregious case of medical misrepresentation I've seen in 40 years of practice." Her certified assessment became our weapon. Nicholas filed an emergency motion with Judge Martinez, recently returned from vacation, known for his skepticism of rushed guardianships. Meanwhile, I'd instructed Marcus to contact Walter Johnson in Atlanta. "It's time to activate the second will," I told him, "and prepare documentation on all properties under Eleanor Johnson, LLC. 2 days before the permanent guardianship hearing, we made our move. Nicholas presented Dr. Reynolds's assessment, videos of my children dismantling my home, and evidence of the financial motives behind their actions. Judge Martinez, unlike his colleague, asked me direct questions and actually listened to my answers. "This court is troubled by the procedural irregularities," he announced. "I'm suspending the temporary guardianship pending a full investigation. Mrs. Washington is to return home immediately with appropriate home health support of her choosing." Vivian's face contorted with shock. Richard's attorney frantically whispered in his ear. I walked out of that courtroom on my own 2 feet, head high like Mama taught me. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I had the weapons to fight it. "Take me home," I told Marcus. "We have work to do." 45 days after they dragged me out, I returned to a house half-emptied. Rectangular dust outlines marked where paintings had hung for decades. Indentations in the carpet showed where furniture had stood. James's desk, gone. My mother's china, vanished. "I've documented everything," Doris said, handing me a thick folder of photographs comparing before and after. Sales receipts, too. They weren't even trying to hide it. Marcus had hired Tanya to work as my part-time aide, a requirement of the judge's order, but on my terms, with someone I trusted. "We need to move quickly," Nicholas advised during our strategy session. "They'll regroup and try again with a different approach." That evening, I made a call I'd been planning for weeks. "I'd like to invite the family for Sunday dinner," I told Vivian, my voice pleasant as church punch. "Now that I'm home, it would be nice to have everyone together." "Mother, are you sure that's wise?" Her surprise barely masked her suspicion. "You've been through so much. Family should be together," I insisted. "I'm making James's pot roast recipe." Sunday arrived with the smell of roasting meat and simmering tension. Vivian came with her husband Charles, Richard, his wife Claire, and their teenage children Aisha and Michael. Marcus and his wife Desiree completed our circle. Around my half-empty dining room, we passed dishes and avoided eye contact. The children filled silence with nervous chatter. "Grandmother, I'm so glad you're home," Aisha said, the only one who seemed genuinely happy to see me. After dessert, sweet potato pie from my grandmother's recipe, I stood. "I'd like to show you all something in the living room," I announced. On the TV screen, Marcus had prepared a presentation. First, photographs of my home before and after, items identified with their approximate values. "What is this?" Richard demanded. I raised my hand for silence. "Let's continue." Next came video clips. Richard telling an appraiser, "She won't be coming back, so we need to move quickly." Vivian instructing movers which furniture to take to her house versus what to sell. The two of them discussing how to split proceeds from my home sale. "That's private property!" Vivian stood, lawyer instincts kicking in. "You can't record without consent." "In my house?" I replied calmly. "Where you were stealing my possessions. I believe I can." Claire, Richard's wife, stared at her husband in horror. "You told me Eleanor had approved selling these things for her care. There's more," I continued, nodding to Marcus, who played the most damning clip, Richard on the phone with their attorney. "The old lady has other properties we're tracking down," his recorded voice said. "Once we have full guardianship, we'll consolidate everything." Silence fell like thunder. "You went through my emails?" Richard sputtered. "No, son. You went through mine, used my computer, left your sessions open." I stood, feeling taller than my 5 feet 4 inches. "You thought I was just a forgetful old woman. You used doctors who never properly examined me. You manipulated the legal system through your connections. You stole my possessions. You imprisoned me in that facility. And all for what? To avoid waiting for me to die naturally before getting your inheritance?" Vivian's husband Charles had moved to the far corner, disassociating himself. Claire was quietly crying. "What happens now?" Richard finally asked, defeat in his voice. "Now," I said, "we begin rebuilding what you destroyed, starting with the truth." "We were trying to protect you," Vivian insisted, pacing my living room the next morning. She'd arrived unannounced, designer handbag clutched like a shield. "You had a fall. We were worried. So worried you sold my possessions before I was even settled at Golden Sunset?" I kept my voice level, hands folded in my lap. "So concerned you falsified medical reports?" "That's not," she began, then stopped. We both knew denials were pointless now. "What do you want, Mother?" "Everything returned. Every item taken from this house brought back within 7 days. What's been sold will be repaid at fair market value." "That's impossible. Some things are already—" "7 days, Vivian." I stood, ending the conversation, and then we discussed the criminal charges. Richard arrived that afternoon, without the arrogant swagger I'd grown accustomed to. His wife Claire accompanied him, her eyes still swollen from crying. "Eleanor," Claire said, taking my hands, "I had no idea. Richard told me you'd agreed to sell things to pay for better care." Richard stared at the floor. "The money is gone. Mother, invested in a development project that's now frozen because of the legal issues. Then you'll need to get creative," I replied, "because judges take a particularly dim view of financial elder abuse, especially when perpetrated by attorneys and financial professionals against their own mother." News traveled fast through our community. Friends from church called. Former colleagues from Howard University stopped by. The whispers had begun. Meanwhile, Nicholas was building our case methodically. The medical ethics complaints against Dr. Stevens and Dr. Freeman, the lawsuit against Golden Sunset for improper care and medication, the criminal complaint for theft and fraud. "They'll likely face disbarment," Nicholas explained of Vivian's legal consequences. "Richard's securities license will be reviewed. Both could face criminal charges, though as a first offense they might avoid jail time." "I don't want them in jail," I clarified. "I want them to make amends." Marcus sat beside me on the porch that evening, the summer air heavy with jasmine from my garden. "Why, Mama? Why did they do this?" His voice cracked with the question he'd been holding for weeks. I took his hand, feeling the same fingers I'd once guided to write his name. "Because they stopped seeing me as a person. I became a collection of assets they felt entitled to. I should have stopped them sooner," he said. "You did exactly right," I assured him. "You gave them enough rope to reveal who they truly are." A week later, moving trucks arrived. Piece by piece, my home began to refill. Some items were gone forever, but each return felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I instructed Nicholas to draft a settlement agreement. In exchange for not pressing criminal charges, Vivian and Richard would make financial restitution, perform community service at a senior center, and participate in family therapy. "Are you sure about this, Eleanor?" Nicholas asked. "The evidence supports much harsher consequences." "I'm not interested in revenge," I explained. "I want healing, for all of us. But healing requires truth first, then accountability." When I called Walter to update him on the situation, he had news of his own. "The DC properties are performing exceptionally well," he reported. "The education fund for your grandchildren is fully funded, and the foundation you and James dreamed of has sufficient seed money whenever you're ready." That night, I sat in my restored living room, surrounded by the pieces of my life they'd tried to dismantle. In the quiet, I felt James's presence stronger than I had in years. "You were right to be cautious," I whispered to his memory. "But you also taught me that family deserves a path to redemption." I opened my laptop and began writing. "The Washington Family Foundation for Education and Elder Dignity. Our legacy would be bigger than our pain." 6 months into the aftermath, patterns had emerged. Vivian approached reconciliation like a legal negotiation, cautious, strategic, maintaining plausible deniability. Richard chose financial restitution, methodically repaying for sold items through installment plans and working weekends at Elder Voices, a senior advocacy center. The justice system moved at its own pace. Dr. Stevens and Dr. Freeman faced medical board investigations. Golden Sunset Homes operated under state supervision after other families came forward with similar stories. Most surprisingly, Aisha, Richard's 17-year-old daughter, sought me out regularly. "Grandma, can you tell me about the March in Selma again?" she asked one afternoon, recording my words for what she called her family history project. "Why this sudden interest?" I asked. Her eyes, so like her grandfather's, met mine directly. "Because they almost erased you, I don't want to lose our history." Those words cemented my decision. That evening, I called Walter. It's time to activate the foundation, I told him, and I've made some adjustments to the distribution plan. 2 weeks later, I invited the entire family for a formal dinner. No pot roast this time, but catered cuisine from James's favorite restaurant. I wore my best dress, royal blue with silver accents, and the pearl earrings James gave me on our last anniversary. They arrived uncertain, conversations stilted. Therapy had begun the long process of excavating truth, but trust remained fragile as spun glass. After dinner, I stood at the head of the table. I've made some decisions about my estate and legacy that I want to share with all of you. Marcus helped me distribute folders to each adult. Inside, documentation of the Eleanor Johnson Properties LLC and the Washington Family Foundation, now officially registered. 3 additional properties? Richard couldn't hide his surprise as he flipped through the papers. All this time? Your father was a wise man, I explained. He understood that black wealth needs protection. We established this structure when you children were young, kept separate from our personal assets. Why didn't you tell us? Vivian asked, attorney's eyes scanning the documentation. Would it have changed your actions? I countered. The silence answered for her. I continued. The foundation will support 2 causes: educational scholarships for African American students and housing security for seniors. It begins operation immediately, with me as chairperson and a board that will include family members who demonstrate commitment to these values. I met each of their eyes in turn. My will has been updated. Personal items and mementos will be distributed among you. The bulk of my estate will fund the foundation in perpetuity. Charles, Vivian's husband, spoke for the first time that evening. This is remarkable, Eleanor, creating a legacy that extends beyond family. Family is still at its heart, I corrected him. We just define family more broadly than blood. I turned to Aisha. Your interest in our history hasn't gone unnoticed. The foundation includes a dedicated scholarship for your education and provisions for you to continue documenting our family story. Her eyes widened. Really, Grandma? Really? Our history matters. The triumphs and the failures. All of it makes us who we are. As the evening wound down, Richard approached me privately. I don't deserve forgiveness, he said simply. Probably not, I agreed. But deserving isn't the point of forgiveness. The point is what we build afterward. Later, alone in my bedroom, I looked at the garden Marcus had helped me replant, the azaleas James loved, the collard greens my mother taught me to grow, the roses that bloomed despite being cut back to almost nothing, just like me. 1 year after the Sunday when I overheard my children planning my disposal, I celebrated my 83rd birthday in my own home, on my own terms. The house hummed with voices, family, friends, former colleagues, students I'd mentored decades ago who now had gray in their hair. Tanya, now more friend than aide, directed caterers with military precision. Speech, speech, they called after the cake was cut. I stood in my living room, surrounded by faces both familiar and new. Some wore the weight of our difficult year in the lines around their eyes. Others, like Aisha, shone with the light of new purpose. A year ago, I began, I thought I was at the end of my story. Instead, I was beginning a new chapter. My gaze found Vivian and Richard, standing slightly apart but present. Our healing remained a work in progress. The therapy sessions had peeled back layers of grievance and misunderstanding. Richard's gambling debts that drove his desperate actions. Vivian's fear of losing control, born from watching her father die slowly decades before. Understanding didn't erase consequences. Vivian was on probation with the Bar Association, Richard under financial ethics review, but it created space for something new to grow. James used to say that a family's true wealth isn't in its possessions, but in what it builds and leaves behind, I continued. The Washington Family Foundation awarded its first scholarships last month to 5 students at Howard University, and our senior housing initiative breaks ground next spring. Applause rippled through the room. Marcus raised his glass in a silent toast. But our most important work has been rebuilding trust, learning that even broken things can be repaired, though the cracks remain visible. I gestured toward the Japanese pottery piece on my mantel, a bowl broken during the chaos, now restored using the kintsugi technique, its cracks filled with gold. Like this bowl, we are more beautiful for having been broken and remade. Later, as guests departed, Aisha approached with a leather-bound book. I finished the first volume, Grandma, she said, offering it to me. Our family history. Inside, She transcribed my stories, adding photographs, news clippings, and her own observations. The final page showed a photograph taken that very day, 4 generations of Washingtons standing together despite everything. "It's still being written," she said, wisdom beyond her 18 years. The story doesn't end. After everyone left, I sat in my garden as fireflies danced in the growing darkness. The motion sensors Marcus had installed cast gentle light across plants that had survived transplanting, drought, and neglect to bloom again. My phone buzzed with a message from Nicholas. "Foundation paperwork finalized, all assets secured. They can never take it from you again." I smiled, thinking of the journey ahead, not just protecting what was mine, but using it to create something larger than myself, than all of us. From the cherry tree James planted on our 5th anniversary, now towering above the fence, a mourning dove called its evening song. In its simple melody, I heard echoes of all that had been lost and found. They had tried to write my ending. Instead, I had written a new beginning, not just for myself, but for generations I would never see. Eleanor Washington's story wasn't over. It was just getting to the good part. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your journey might inspire another queen.